Okay, let's tell you about some commonly used chips on the Apple laptop in the class. In the maintenance, often broken chips and its introduction of the function. Different boards can be seen from circuit diagram where it is located. What are the commonly used chips? Frequently broken chips in maintenance. There are several main chips that are often broken. First of all, the first one is the bridge, PCH. Generally, this bridge, PCH, has only one board. So this bridge is usually BGA chip, a larger chip. It is a chip that manages each internal device, and is also relatively easy to break, the most important chip. So what equipment does the bridge contain? The first one is USB device. Second is a hard disk. Third is optical drive. Abbreviation of the hard disk is HDD. Abbreviation for optical drive, ODD. Also includes audio. The fifth sorrow, never WLAN, etc. He managed more equipment. In addition to network equipment and computer RTC information, it is also kept inside the bridge PCH. Seventh, the reset of whole board is also done by it. Eighth, power management. These are managed by this bridge. Then use the BGA reward station to operate during maintenance. Its English name was usually used to indicate on the drawing, expressed by PCH or ACH. So in the maintenance, the bridge is also the most important. But now many new boards have made the bridge and CPU together. My board is separate from the CPU and the bridge. The two boards are put together. I will show them to everyone later. This is our number one chip, which is the bridge. Let's take a look at this board. It's the CPU and the bridge together. Then the repair cost of this kind of board damage is relatively high. This piece is highly integrated. However, the bridge and the CPU are usually separated for the large boards. This is our CPU and the chip we will talk about next. The main CPU is the chip I referred to. The characteristic of the CPU is that there are more inductors next to it. It is also BGA package. The above bridge is also BGA package. The so-called BGA package is that its solder joints are at the bottom. Generally, a BGA package chip on a board is nothing more than the 3 BGA chips, either the main CPU or the bridge. If your board has a discrete graphics card, it is also BGA package, which is GPU. Then these 3 BGA chips had different functions here. Bridge had just mentioned that the output it manages the device, and the main CPU is the main controller. It generally uses AP to express. And the bridge is the PCH and ACH just mentioned. This is a relatively new board. The old boards used to be called MCH and RCH. Their functions are same and highly integrated. Then the cost of these 3 chips is relatively high. If any of the 3 chips in the laptop is broken, it will cause a different situation. If the bridge and CPU are broken, it will not boot. But this graphics card is not the same, it has video RAM. Next to it called video RAM. Then this Discrete graphics card broken, what will it cause? If the Discrete graphics card is broken, it will cause no display, screen distortion, restart, power failure, and automatic shutdown. In this case, it has something to do with the graphics card. It is next to this kind of video RAM. There will be a large BGA package next to the decreased graphics card. The small particles next to it are the video RAM, one by one. This video RAM is different due to different boards, but the structure is the same. But the chance of a bad video RAM will not be high. The video RAM is generally broken, which will cause the screen to be blurred. Generally, it is rarely broken, unless it is artificially broken when soldering the graphics card and there is no protection. The chances of these 3 major chips being broken are relatively higher. Bridge, CPU, decreased graphics card. But some boards have integrated graphics card. So-called integrated graphics card don't have this discrete graphics card. There is no video RAM integrated in the CPU. The integrated graphics card doesn't have this independent chip. Therefore, during maintenance, the soldering of these 3 chips is also our top priority. We need to use a BGA repair station to solder. These commonly used chips are relatively expensive. Other chips are relatively low cost. We got a motherboard. First find these 3 chips. This is our 3 major chips. Let's talk about the next chip. The 4th chip is called EC. Easy, it is an embedded controller. So its function is equivalent to the bridge assistance. Some functions are handed over to the EC to handle. What are its functions? First, the button triggers the switch. Second, the battery power detection. Third, the keyboard controller and mouse, which means our touchpad. Manual touch. The manual touch of our laptop is also in charge. 4. The fan. The speed of fan is also controlled by it. The fifth is our panel indicator. Six. Power management. The above are the 6 main functions of EC at present, which are relatively easy to break. The cost of this kind of EC on Apple laptop is relatively high. We will point out that there is a crystal oscillator next to it according to its drawings. There is a crystal oscillator next to the EC, you have to remember that it's relatively small. Both Apple laptops and our Windows computer had this chip. When you check its frame picture, you'll find out this chip should be checked. Also easy to break. The fifth chip is also very important in maintenance, called BIOS. It's an 8-pin chip, it's a bit more generous. Usually next to the EC or the bridge. It has programs inside and is the most basic input and output system of a computer. Then the CPU uses internal program to manage virus device. The hardware of the chip itself is not easy to break. The internal program is generally bad. It is important to find out here that the internal program is damaged. So what are the failures caused by its damage? Generally, Series 1 will also cause no boot. Second, the keyboard is not available. Third, interface devices such as hard disks are unavailable. Serious non-booting, unavailable keyboard, etc. This all have a lot to do with the BIOS, especially on the laptop, including the driver cannot be installed. And the USB interface not work is also caused by this sometimes. In other words, input and output device like keyboard, touch, and camera. Look at the device that the CPU uses this internal program to manage. So its program is damaged, which causes virus device to not work. It is the most basic input and output system of a computer. So this BIOS chip, no matter what the laptop is, it is very critical. It's an 8-pin one next to the EC or next to the bridge. At the time, the circuit icon will be shown to everyone. Every board has this kind of color picture to see the BIOS of this EC. But we have two BIOS in some place. But most Apple laptops are one. What if there are two BIOS? One is the EC BIOS and the Southbridge BIOS. One is responsible for triggering, and one is responsible for managing the device. We will talk about this when we talk about the circuit later. We need to figure out this point. Therefore, the damage of the BIOS, we must also remember that it's also a big chip. Be sure to find it on the diagram, including the physical diagram and the circuit diagram. The system is a very critical chip. We have it on every board, called charging IC. Charging chip. Its chip is relatively easy to break. What is it mainly responsible for? Two functions to control power supply and battery operation. The first is to control and protect the work of the isolation circuit. The second function, our battery charging, is also related to it, controlling the charging of the battery. From this point, it can be seen that the failure caused by the damage of the charging IC is also not booting. The protection isolation circuit does not work. This is the first major fault. If it does not turn on, the protection isolation circuit does not work. It may be the charging chip failure. The second point is that it can be turned on but cannot be charged. In the third case, the independent power supply does not work or the battery does not turn on. In other words, there is some situation. The laptop does not work when plugged in, or the laptop works when plugged in. Or the power supply does not work, the battery can work. The battery does not work, the power supply can work in this case. Are directly related to this IC. Charging IC is also a chip that is relatively easy to break. We have to understand this. This is the main function of the charging chip. There will be on every motherboard, and there can only be one. This is the charging chip. The 7th chip is also 3V, 5V standby chip we often say. That is to say, in the case of standby, his role is to control the high side and low side MOSFET to generate a standby volt of 3V and 5V. Apple laptop and Windows laptop will have this chip. It does not work when it is in standby. The 3V will be mentioned later. It is mainly used to power the 3 major chips of EC, bridge, and switch. 5V is the same. So when in standby, generally speaking, the charging chip is working. And 3V and 5V is also working before pressing the switch. The so-called standby refers to the state of love when the switch is not pressed. Generally, when we are in the standby mode, only a few chips are working. Generally, it includes bridge, EC, standby chip, charging IC. These bridges are already in working state and waiting state. No other chips are working. When we focus on the 3V and 5V circulator, we focus on this chip. This 7th chip is the top priority, a very critical chip. It is a 3V and 5V chip, which is also relatively easy to break. The 8th chip is our network card chip. It mainly controls networking. This chip has a feature. There is a 25 crystal oscillator next to it, which is our network card chip. All laptop network cards are 25 crystal oscillator. This chip is responsible for networking. If it is connected to the internet, it connects here, and it connects to the network card interface of the network card WLAN. In other words, if you cannot connect to the internet, check that the network cable is not connected to the internet. From the hardware point of view, it is possible that the network card chip or the network card is damaged. This chip was still easily damaged by lightning in the early days. Generally, the computer cannot be connected to the internet when lightning strikes, or it does not turn on. Generally, the probability of the damage to the chip is higher when lightning strikes. When there is a slight deviation from the network cable, the network card chip is usually next to the network card interface, usually next to the network card connector. Here is the network card connector. What do we use in English to express it? RJ45 is generally used to represent the network card connector. Be sure to remember that this big chip is also relatively easy to break. If there is a network card, it will naturally think of our knife sound card chip. So what does a sound card chip do? It controls the sound called audio. Which aspect of the sound is controlled? The three functions of speaker, headset, microphone are all controlled by the chip. Then these three functions are not normal or have a lot to do with our audio IC. It is generally next to the headphone connector, 48 pins square. Twelve pins on each side. If our computer has no sound, it has something to do with this chip. After excluding the software, we flashed the BIOS and they still didn't work. Most of them have something to do with our network card, self card. These two functional chips are the top priority. At the time, we will find these chips for everyone on the circuit. They are very important chips. And the 10th kind of chips are power supply chips. What chip does the package power supply chips contain? It contains a RAM power supply chip. It is used in the RAM power supply circuit to control the conduction of the high side and low side MOSFET to generate the main power supply for the RAM. Then this circuit is also first chip to work after triggering. This RAM power supply chip is also relatively easy to break. We can see the picture. So what does he look like? For example, this is a RAM power supply chip. The RAM power supply chip is to control the high side and low side MOSFET. This is a large inductor for the RAM power supply. It is probably like this, and the chapter about the RAM power supply chip will explain it in detail. Then it controls the conduction of the high side and low side MOSFET. This is a high side MOSFET. This is a low side MOSFET. This inductor's electricity is sent to the RAM. This is RAM. This chip mainly controls the high side and low side MOSFET. It uses a square wave to control the conduction of the high side and low side MOSFET to supply RAM large inductor. So when we all learn the RAM power supply circuit, think about the power supply circuit I draw now. If the chip is broken, it will lead to the no electricity on the inductor which is near RAM. If the inductor is not powered, the RAM will not work. It will also cause the failure of not booting. Can be triggered but doesn't turn on. This is a RAM power chip. The second type of the power supply chip is a bridge power supply chip. Its principle is the same as that of the RAM power supply. It also has the upper and lower tubes. It controls the high side and low side MOSFET of the bridge to work to generate power for the bridge. What happens if it is damaged? It will cause the bridge to have no power, and it will also cause it to not turn on. If any of this level is abnormal, it will not boot. The machine can be triggered, but the machine does not turn on and screen no display. And the third type of power supply chip is an independent graphics power supply chip. The principles of these three chips are the same. Its different chips control different high side and low side MOSFET, powering different loads. Then the independent graphics card power supply chip supplies power to the graphics card. The power supply chip of the bridge controls the high side and low side MOSFET to generate power for the bridge. The bridge sends the graphics cards on our laptop, including RAM, repair different operation voltage. So it can produce several voltages in one circuit. It can only be designed separately. At this point, we will find these three power supply chips on the mat at the time. If your board has an integrated graphics card, there is no such circuit. Discrete graphics card only has a discrete graphics power supply chip. This point needs to be clarified. The above is a packet power supply chips. We have marked on the picture. We have to learn to find these chips. This 10-chip knowledge point is called the packet power supply chips. At the 11 is our very critical chip, the CPU power supply chip. It controls the conduction of the high side and low side MOSFET to generate power and provide voltage for CPU to control the conduction of the high side and low side MOSFET. It's usually next to a CPU and is also square. It is QFN package. This chip is also relatively easy to break. In other words, as long as any one of our major power supply chips is damaged, it will not boot. During maintenance, we must learn to analyze the working principle of each chip on the circuit diagram. How to divide it on the mat and how to divide it in kind are very important. In other words, in the entire notebook, including the 11 chips just mentioned. Any damage will cause the notebook to not work normally. The probability of damage during maintenance is relatively high. We have to learn to convert these chips. We will give you this kind of pictures in the later preview, and you have to learn to find these chips. Next, let's use this A33 board and compare the photos to find the chips just mentioned. Every board is different. We can only get this kind of case to talk about. Let's take a look at the shape of this board. Let's zoom in and take a look. First, look at this CPU. If the CPU is broken, the cost is relatively high. The inductors next to it are powering it. This is BGA package I just talked about. You see this kind of bridge is also BGA package. This chip manages the USB, which is the chip in the picture. It manages USB, hard disk, optical drive, including wireless external device. It is easier to break during maintenance. Once broken, it will also cause no boot. Power supply inductor next to it. And this is the RAM. You can take a look. These 16 particles are RAM. If the RAM is broken, it will also cause it not boot, but the probability of being broken is not high. This is onboard RAM. As you can see here, this is a discrete graphics card. The so-called independent display is the chip GPU. If my laptop can't display failure, or restart, the temperature is too high, maybe this chip had problem. We have to take it down and redo it, or buy a new graphics card and put it back. It's also a relatively expensive chip. These inductors are used to power it, and it's also very important. So discrete graphics, these three BGA fine. Then look at this position. The 8-pin chip is the BIOS. What should I do if this chip is broken? We just talked about it. It corresponds to the position of the motherboard, which is a B wire just in the position. Once this BIOS is damaged, it will not boot. In other words, the interface device cannot be used, including hard disks, USB, and keyboards. The computer cannot install the system, and the blue screen is related to this. At that time, we use a programmer to download the program through the official website to flash the system for it, so we can solve this problem. The BIOS is a very useful chip. What kind of commonly used chip will be seen on this side of the board? There are not commonly used chips on this side of the board. We turn over and look at the other side more often. Let's zoom in on this side. This is the charging chip. Then this charging chip is responsible for the protection and isolation circuit to control the battery and the adapter. At the same time, it can charge our battery. If your laptop battery cannot be charged, it has a direct relationship with it, including the original device next to it. Check it again. The chance of it being bad is also relatively high. In severe cases, it will not boot. We will talk about this chip when we talk about the protection isolation circuit for the first time. How does the charging IC work? Just talk about this chip. Second, let's talk about the standby chip. It controls this 3V and 5V standby circuit. Then after the protection isolation circuit works, after waiting for some standby chips to work, we work on the chip immediately. Controlling the 14.5V of the protection isolation circuit is reduced to 3V and 5V. This chip is broken, and it is also not booting due to the abnormal standby. This chip is also the standby chip. Accidents at this position of the standby chip should be investigated. This is the standby chip. In addition, this is a RAM power supply chip here. As mentioned earlier, this is one of the IC power supply chips. Most of the boards are next to here, but some boards are not necessarily. The specific time will be determined by this drawing. I'm just talking this board as a case here. It can be said to be deadly. You must learn and use it alive. Therefore, the RAM power supply chip is gone, and it does not turn on. In addition, we will find the power supply chip of the bridge. Take a look in the position. It generates 1.05V, which powers the bridge. In other words, after pressing the switch, the RAM power supply is working first. Then the power supply chip of the bridge is working to provide voltage to the bridge. Then we look at where the power supply chip of the graphics card is. Let's zoom in and take a look. The power supply chip of this CPU. Let's take a look again. The power supply chip of the graphics card is in this position. Then its power supply is not normal, which also causes no display. Or no display is not necessarily a graphics card problem. It may also be caused by abnormal power supply of the graphics card. When we fix a display during maintenance, we can directly make a graphics card. First, check if the power supply is abnormal. If it is not normal, it will not display or freeze or restart. These conditions are directly related to the power supplies. That is to say, after the triggering, the first is that this power supply chips must work first. Supply power to each device. Then look further down where is the CPU power supply. It is to control the upper and lower tubes to supply power to the CPU. Then this chip does not work and our CPU does not have power supply. If the CPU is not powered, the CPU cannot work. The same is true for CPU not working, and it will also cause it not boot. These tantalum capacitors are filtered by these power supplies. It's not too bad, it's made with these chips, and we need to figure out this. Then this chip is a voltage conversion chip. It's equivalent to a linear regulator. Control voltage input and output. These model interfaces are used for power transmission. This will be mentioned in the specific small circuit explanation. Today we mainly talk about these commonly used large chips. Voltage conversion of this chip. When we talk about the circuit, we'll talk about it. These voltage conversion are equivalent to the voltage regulator, like small transformer. Convert different voltages into related voltage to power the interface device. Okay, let's take a look at the sound card chip and network card chip. Here is the network card chip. If our computer can connect to the internet, it's directly related to this chip. There is a network card chip and a sound card chip just mentioned. Where is it located? Let's find. Take a look, it's square with 48 pins. So this sound card chip is the one just mentioned. It controls the speakers, earphone and microphone, which is microphone. It controls all three. If three of them do not work, then it has a direct relationship with the chip related circuit or itself. From the picture, we can see there is 11 kinds of chips on the board. In different positions, we have to learn to find. During maintenance, if you encounter different faults, we need to find the circuit of the chip itself and the chip itself. This picture is in the courseware. You can check it out when you are okay. We use this board as a case to introduce. I will compare the chip on the picture when I encounter other boards in the future. If you see a lot, you will know each other. The above is an understanding and good or bad judgment of the common chips.